They said even a blind girl should know when she's been left. And yet, there she stood, veil pulled over sightless eyes, chin lifted, spine straight, while the town laughed behind her back. Her groom, gone before sunrise, left nothing but a note and a bottle half empty. But fate don't like cowards, and Dust Hollow had never seen what it looks like when a girl who's never seen a sunrise becomes the storm. Because when that lone rider showed up braid-tied with hawk feather, eyes like distant fire, he didn't ask permission. He asked for her hand. Some stories ride in soft, like dust on the breeze. Others come loud, dragging thunder behind their boots. This one, it asks, what would you do if the only person who truly saw you was the one the world told you to fear? Tell me your thoughts down in the comments. I'd sure like to hear how this one sat with you. Let's see how that story went down. The sun beat down on Dust Hollow with a particular malice that Tuesday, or so it felt to Elena. It was the sort of heat that baked the meanness right into the cracked adobe walls and the narrow, unforgiving hearts of its inhabitants. She stood before the small, sun-warped church, a still figure in a world that had, in the last hour, tilted and spun away from her like a runaway wagon wheel. The whispers had started as a low hum, like angry bees in a distant hive, then grown to a rustle, and finally, to the distinct, pitying clucks and outright jeers that now lapped at the edges of her awareness. Jacob wasn't coming. Her intended. The man her father had brokered a future with had found his courage lacking, or perhaps his cruelty in abundance. Elena didn't need to see their faces to know the expressions they wore. The smug satisfaction of the town gossips, the thinly veiled relief of mothers with eligible, sighted daughters, the awkward shame of the few who still possessed a shred of decency. She could hear it all in the cadence of their shifting feet, the scrape of a boot on gravel, the sharp intake of breath that preceded a particularly cutting remark. Her blindness, a condition since a childhood fever stole her sight, had always set her apart, made her an object of either charity or scorn. Today, it was a potent cocktail of both. The dress she wore was a testament to that. It was Mrs. Henderson's, the pastor's wife, altered with clumsy stitches by the good lady herself, a gown of faded ivory lace, smelling faintly of mothballs and another woman's long-ago dreams. It hung a little loose on Elena's slender frame, the sleeves too long, the hem uneven, a hand-me-down hope. She could feel the scratch of the cheap lace against her skin, a constant reminder of her place. The town had probably called it Christian charity. Elena knew it as the soft, suffocating blanket of their pity. Shameful, a voice rasped, too close for comfort. Goody Miller, no doubt, whose tongue was sharper than any cactus thorn, leaving a blind girl at the altar. Still, what did he expect? Elena flinched inwardly, but kept her spine straight, her head held high. Her father had taught her that much. Never let them see you break, Lena girl. But her father was gone now. 2 years cold in the hardscrabble cemetery beyond the town limits, leaving her with little more than a small, mortgaged plot and this final, humiliating arrangement. It was into this tableau of small-town cruelty that he rode. The shift in the crowd's murmur was palpable. The jeering, self-satisfied chatter hitched, then fractured into something else, surprise, then a low, guttural hostility. Elena felt it as a change in the air pressure, a sudden tension that prickled her skin, the scent of horse, dust, and something wilder, like pine smoke and open plains. cut through the cloying sweetness of the wilted flowers clutched in her hands, a man's voice, calm and resonant as a river stone, spoke. The woman, she is to be wed. A hush fell, thick and waiting. Then Pastor Henderson cleared his throat. His voice flustered. There has been a difficulty, a misunderstanding. The groom, he has not come, the stranger stated. It wasn't a question. Elena tilted her head, trying to place him through the sound of his voice. The subtle creak of leather as he presumably dismounted. He was close now. She could feel a warmth, a presence that was vastly different from the cramped, anxious energies of Dust Hollow. An Injun. Someone spat. The word was an epithet, loaded with generations of fear and contempt. What's a redskin want here? The stranger ignored them. My name is Kai, he said, his voice still directed. Elena sensed. Towards her, though it carried to the edges of the uneasy crowd. I am of the Fire Mesa people. Our ways are different. But honor is understood by all men who are true. He paused, and Elena felt his gaze, though she could not see it, settle upon her. If this woman will have me, I will take the place of the man who fled. I will marry her. Her honor will be restored. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Then, laughter, harsh, incredulous. Marry a savage. Goody Miller shrieked. The blind girl and the heathen. What a pair! He probably wants her land. Meager as it is, another man bellowed. Or thinks a blind wife won't see his wickedness. The insults washed over Kai, leaving him seemingly untouched. Elena sensed no flinch, no anger in his stillness, only a profound, rooted calm. It was this, more than anything, that reached through her own pain and humiliation. This man, this stranger, stood unbowed before their collective scorn, offering her, what? A different kind of pity, or something else entirely. She took a breath, the scent of his wildness filling her senses, a stark contrast to the stale, judgmental air of Dust Hollow. He was offering her a way out, a shield against their derision. It was a desperate, unthinkable choice. But what was her alternative? A life spent as Dust Hollow's cautionary tale. The blind spinster jilted at the altar. Elena turned her face towards where she judged Kai to be standing. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but carried a surprising strength, slicing through the crowd's venomous whispers. You offer this to a woman you do not know. To a stranger, I see a woman wronged. Kai replied, his voice steady. I see courage in the way you stand against their scorn. My people believe a woman's spirit is the heart of the lodge. A strong spirit is a great gift. He sees courage, not blindness, not pity. She made her decision. It bloomed in her heart, a fragile, defiant thing, facing the unseen. Derisive faces of the townspeople, Elena spoke, her voice ringing with a clarity that silenced them, for a moment at least. For all my life in this town, she said, her words measured and sharp, you have looked at me, but you have never seen me. You saw only my blindness. You wrapped me in your pity. You defined me by what I lacked. She turned her head slightly towards Kai. This man, this stranger. Perhaps he sees what you never could. Then, directly to Kai, loud enough for all to hear. Yes, Kai of the Fire Mesa, I will have you. A fresh wave of outrage erupted. She can't be serious. Pastor, you cannot allow this. Pastor Henderson wrung his hands, his face a mask of indecision and discomfort. Eleni's, my child, This is highly irregular, a rash decision. This man, he is not of our faith, not of our people." Elena's chin lifted. The scent of the wilting flowers in her hand was suddenly unbearable. A symbol of a hope that had curdled, she let them drop to the dusty ground. "Pastor," she challenged, her voice unwavering, "just an hour ago, you were prepared to bless my union with Jacobi, a man who showed himself a coward and a liar. You would have blessed the one who fled and shamed me. Why, then, would you refuse the one who dares to stand in his place, who offers to right that wrong?" The pastor stammered, his gaze darting between Elena, the stoic warrior, and the muttering, hostile faces of his congregation. Elena's words, however, had struck a chord, shaming him with their simple, irrefutable logic. He was a man of God, however flawed, and the hypocrisy was stark. He swallowed hard. The vows are sacred," he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. "If both parties are willing—" He looked at Kai. "Do you understand the sanctity of the vows you would take, son?" "Before God," Kai met his gaze squarely. "I understand the sanctity of a promise made before one's people, and before the Great Spirit. A man's word is his life. I will honor this woman. I will protect her. This I vow." It wasn't a Christian affirmation, but it held a power, a raw integrity that silenced further protest from the pastor. He opened his worn Bible, his fingers trembling slightly as he found the passage. The ceremony that followed was brief, almost stark, punctuated by the angry murmurs of the crowd and the distant bark of a dog. Elena felt Kai's hand, warm and calloused. Take hers. It was a strong hand, a capable hand. It did not tremble. She spoke her vows into the oppressive silence. Her voice. He looked at Kai. "Do you deep and resonant, echo hers." When it was done, a brittle quiet hung in the air. Sheriff Harland, a beefy man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much of Dust Hollow's petty cruelties, stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. "This arrangement is irregular, Kai," he said, his voice gravelly, "and you ain't exactly welcome in these parts. You take her, you ride out, and don't expect a warm welcome if you show this, I vow." It wasn't a Christian affirmation this day. His gaze flickered to Elena. "You sure about this, girl? No tellin' what kind of life awaits you with his kind." "I am more certain of this," Elena replied, turning towards the sheriff's voice, "than I was of a life spent in Dust Hollow." "Sheriff." Kai's hand found her elbow, a light but firm touch guiding her. He led her to his horse, a powerful animal that shifted and snorted softly at her unfamiliar scent. With effortless strength, he lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. Elena settled against his broad back, feeling the warmth of him, the solid strength that had been absent from her life for so long. They rode out of Dust Hollow without a backward glance, the angry shouts and dire warnings of the villagers fading behind them like the remnants of a bad dream. Ahead lay the vast, unknown expanse of the desert, and a future with a stranger from a world she could not imagine. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Elena felt a flicker not of fear, but of a perilous, untamed hope. The man behind her was an enigma. Dust Hollow. Sheriff. He had looked at her, truly looked, and seen not a blind, pitiable creature, but a woman worthy of honor. And in the desolate landscape of her life, that was a more precious gift than sight itself. The journey from Dust Hollow was a passage not merely across miles of sun-baked earth and shadowed canyons, but through layers of Elena's own tightly bound perceptions. With each league, Kai's steady horse carried them further from the bitterness of her old life. The silence of the vast, open land began to speak to her in ways she hadn't known possible. Kai was a quiet companion, his presence a comforting solidity at her back. He spoke little, but when he did, his words painted pictures for her mind's eye. The way the hawk circled on unseen currents, the distant shimmer of a salt flat, the ancient, gnarled shapes of the pinon pines clinging to life on rocky slopes. He taught her to feel the subtle shifts in the wind, to read the texture of the ground through the horse's gait, to discern the distant presence of water by the faintest scent of damp earth and willow. Fire Mesa, when they finally reached it, was not a place of harsh angles and judgmental silences like Dust Hollow. It felt, to Elena, like entering a warm embrace. The air itself hummed with a different energy, a blend of wood smoke, roasting corn, desert herbs, and an undercurrent of something ancient and deeply spiritual. The dwellings, she learned by touch, were built into the protective curve of the mesa, crafted from the very rock and earth. As if grown there, children's laughter echoed, a sound she'd rarely heard untainted by mockery. Their arrival caused a stir, but it was not the hostile curiosity of Dust Hollow. Here, people approached with a quiet reverence. An old woman, her hand like gnarled but gentle oak, took Elena's own. Her touch lingered, questing, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. The spirit is strong in this one. The old woman, whose name was Whispering Sky, proclaimed, her voice carrying a surprising authority. Her eyes do not see the surface of things, but her hands can read the heart of the stone, the memory of the wind. She has the inner sight. And so, Elena, the jilted blind girl of Dust Hollow, was welcomed not as a burden or an oddity, but as a gift. They did not pity her lack of sight. They revered the unique perception it had apparently awakened in her. Kai, her silent warrior husband, watched with an unreadable expression as his people embraced her, his usual stoicism softened by a subtle warmth around his eyes when he looked at her. Life at Fire Mesa was a tapestry woven from sensation. Elena learned to truly feel the world around her. She'd run her palms over sun-warmed rocks, feeling the day's heat radiate back, sensing the faint, fossilized memories of ancient seas held within their granular texture. She'd stand in the winds, letting it comb through her hair, imagining it carried whispers from the high peaks, stories of the eagles. The earth itself seemed to breathe beneath her bare feet, its rhythm steady and profound. The children, drawn by her quiet nature and the strange, soft melodies she began to coax from a simple wooden flute Kai had carved for her, became her constant companions. She couldn't describe the vistas she'd never seen, but she could weave tales from the sensations the land offered her. The courage of a lone wildflower pushing through hard clay, the patient strength of the ancient cliffs. She taught them to play the flute, not by note, but by feeling, coaxing them to translate the sigh of the wind or the ripple of water into sound. Her music sensing the faint, fossilized wells of emotion and imagery that even she didn't fully understand. Melodies that felt like memories even to those who had lived them. One season, the rains came with a relentless fury, turning the dry arroyos into roaring torrents, the sky a bruised purple for days on end. The people of Fire Mesa retreated to the deeper, ancestral caves that honeycombed the heart of their sacred mountain. It was during this time, huddled around a communal fire in the flickering light, that whispering Sky approached Elena. "The great rains have opened the passages to the remembering cave," the old woman said, her voice hushed with reverence. "It is time. The spirits have called for you. The history of our people. It waits to be read by hands that truly see." It was an honor of unparalleled significance. Kai later explained in a rare moment of extended speech, a privilege reserved for those chosen to be the keepers of memories. Elena, her heart pounding with a mixture of trepidation and awe, allowed herself to be led deep into the earth. The air in the remembering cave was cool and still, smelling of damp stone and centuries of accumulated wisdom. Her fingers traced intricate carvings on the cave walls, smoothed the surfaces of uniquely shaped story stones, felt the complex patterns of knotted cords that chronicled generations of history. Famine, abundance, conflict, and peace. She didn't see images, but felt waves of emotion, impressions of events, the echoes of lives lived long ago. It was overwhelming, a torrent of shared human experience that left her breathless and profoundly connected to these people who had taken her in. As they sat by their own small fire later, the sound of rain, a distant drum against the stone. Kai's usual reserve seemed to soften further. Perhaps it was the intimacy of the shared cave, or the weight of the history Elena had just touched. "You asked once why I was in your village, so far from my people," he said, his voice low, a current of old pain running beneath it. It was not by choice. Elena waited, her hand still tingling with the phantom touch of the past. "There was a time," he continued, staring into the flames, "when the bluecoats, the soldiers, demanded a sacrifice from our tribe to ensure a false peace. They wanted one of our young men, one accused unjustly of a crime he did not commit. My cousin, our elders. They were divided. Some argued for peace at any cost. His jaw tightened. I refused. I would not trade a life, an innocent life, for the illusion of safety. For that, for defying the will of some of our council who feared war, I was asked to leave Fire Mesa until the shadow had passed from our lands." Elena reached out, her hand finding his arm. His muscles were rigid beneath her touch. "So you became an outcast, too," she whispered, understanding dawning, his quiet strength, his profound sense of honor. It had been forged in his own exile. He knew what it was to be judged, to be alone. It was why, perhaps, he had seen her, truly seen her, in the square at Dust Hollow, not long after the rain subsided and the people returned to their homes on the mesa. A new arrival stirred the village. A small boy, no more than 6 winters old, was found wandering at the edge of their territory, orphaned by a sickness that had swept through a neighboring, nomadic band. He was a quiet child, with eyes that seemed too old for his small face, and he clung to Elena almost immediately. One afternoon, as Elena was showing him how to feel the different textures of dried grasses, he looked up at her, his small brow furrowed. "Your mama," he said, his voice a childish pipe. She cried when the white dress got torn. "Didn't she? Before the sun-faced man left you." Elena froze. She had never spoken of Jacob, nor of the small tear in the ill-fitting wedding dress she'd discovered only by touch later that fateful day, a detail no one in Dust Hollow would have noticed or cared about. Kai, who was nearby mending a hunting snare, looked up sharply. His eyes narrowed on the child. How could this boy know? The tribe whispered that the orphan had the gift of foresight, or perhaps of seeing echoes of the past. Whatever it was, It was another thread in the strange, mystical tapestry of life at Fire Mesa. Elena's place among the Fire Mesa people, however, was truly cemented during the Moon of New Beginnings. A young woman in the village was struggling in childbirth, her labor long and arduous, her strength failing. The midwife, a skilled woman, was anxious, the child stubbornly refusing to turn. Fear, palpable and cold, began to grip the small dwelling. Elena, drawn by the sounds of distress, felt a desperate urge to help. She remembered the calming effect her flute sometimes had on fretful children, on anxious animals. Taking the simple wooden instrument, she began to play. It wasn't a specific song, but a melody that seemed to rise from the very earth, a gentle, pulsing rhythm that mimicked a strong, steady heartbeat, interwoven with a high, soaring tune, like the wind, whispering encouragement through the pines. The tense atmosphere in the dwelling softened. The laboring mother's breathing deepened, her cries easing, and slowly, miraculously, as Elena's song filled the small space, the baby turned, and with a final, triumphant cry, was born, healthy and strong. That evening, as the village celebrated the new life, Whispering Sky approached Elena, a ceremonial feathered headband in her hands. "The spirits speak through you, daughter," the old woman declared, her voice resonant. "Your breath gives voice to the unseen. Your music soothes the troubled heart and welcomes life. From this day forward, you shall be known not only as wife to Kai, but as Tskilau Su'u En Farmak, Wind's Song, a living symbol of our people, a reminder that even in darkness, there is music, and in silence, there is sight." Kai stood beside her, and though his face remained stoic, Elena felt the warmth of his pride, a current that flowed between them stronger than any spoken word. She, Elena, the discarded blind girl, had found her voice, her vision, and her tribe, not in the harsh light of Dust Hollow, but in the gentle, knowing shadows of Fire Mesa. The wind carried her song, and it was a song of belonging. The harmony Elena had found at Fire Mesa, resonant as the clear notes of her flute, was a fragile thing in a world that still harbored the discordant echoes of places like Dust Hollow. Weeks turned into months, each day deepening her connection to the land, to its people, and to Kai, the warrior whose quiet strength was the bedrock beneath her new life. The unspoken words between them were a language of shared glances she could somehow sense, the brush of hands, the comfortable silences filled with mutual understanding. But the serenity was not to last. The past, Elena knew, often had a long, grasping reach. It came in the form of Sheriff Harland, his face a thundercloud, leading a posse of grim-faced men from Dust Hollow and a few hired guns whose eyes held no loyalty beyond the glint of coin. They rode into the heart of Fire Mesa's main encampment as if they owned the ground, their horses kicking up dust that settled like a shroud on the startled quiet. "We're here for the woman," Harland bellowed, his voice amplified by righteous indignation. Elena, formerly of Dust Hollow, she was abducted by this savage. He gestured contemptuously at Kai, who had stepped forward, flanked by tribal elders, his expression unyielding as the mesa cliffs. A murmur of outrage rippled through the Fire Mesa people gathering behind their leaders. "She is no prisoner," one of the elders, Old Man Willow, stated, his voice raspy with age but firm. "She is Wind's Song, wife to Kai, and honored among us." "Honored," Harland scoffed. "She's a blind woman, deluded or coerced. We have laws. She's a citizen of the territory." and she'll be returned. For her own protection. It was then that Elena stepped forward, Kai's hand briefly touching her arm in a gesture of support she felt more than saw. The wind, her namesake, seemed to swirl around her, lifting strands of her dark hair. "Sheriff Harland," she began, her voice clear and carrying, silencing the brewing confrontation. "You speak of protection, yet, when I was in Dust Hollow, what protection did I receive from its scorn, from its pity that felt more like a cage? What protection did I have when your town, your people, delighted in my public humiliation?" Harland shifted uncomfortably. "That ain't the issue here. Elena, this engine. Elena interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Is Kai my husband? He did not abduct me. He offered me honor when my own people, your people, offered only derision. He saw a woman, not a affliction." She turned her face towards the direction of the Dust Hollow men. "You speak of my blindness, Sheriff, but it is you, and those like you, who are truly blind. You see only what conforms to your narrow view, what you wish to see." Her voice rose, imbued with the power of her conviction, the quiet authority she now possessed. "I am not a prisoner here, Sheriff. I am home. I am not the silence you wished me to be. I am the voice your town tried to smother. And in this place, it has only grown stronger, clearer." A low, approving rumble came from the Fire Mesa warriors. Harland's men looked uneasy, some glancing away from the undeniable force of Elena's words. Even Harland seemed momentarily taken aback by her transformation from the meek, jilted girl he remembered, but his arrogance was a stubborn weed. Fine words. "Elena, but they change nothing. You're coming back with us, by force, if necessary." Kai stepped forward, then, placing himself before Elena, a silent wall of defiance. The warriors of Fire Mesa moved with him, a subtle, dangerous shift of figures armed with bows and lances. The air grew thick with unspoken threats. Harland, seeing the unified resolve, knew he couldn't win a direct fight here, not without significant bloodshed he likely wasn't prepared for. His eyes narrowed with frustration and a promise of retribution. "This isn't over," he snarled, reining his horse back. "You'll regret this day." With that, he and his posse retreated, leaving a trail of resentment and unease. A few nights later, the uneasy peace was shattered. A cry of alarm went up, rushing from their dwelling. Elena and Kai were met with the acrid smell of smoke and the heartbreaking sight of orange flames licking at the tall, ceremonial banner pole that stood at the heart of their village. Their most sacred banner, woven with generations of history and spiritual significance, was being consumed. The warriors managed to douse the flames before the pole itself was destroyed. But the banner, intricately beaded, feathered, and painted, was reduced to charred tatters and ashes. A wave of grief and outrage swept through the tribe. This was more than an attack. It was a desecration, a deep wound to their collective soul. As dawn broke, casting a pale, mournful light over the scene, Kai knelt, sifting through the cold ashes with meticulous care. His fingers, usually so gentle with Elena, were now tense, analytical. He picked up something small, dark, and metallic. "As I suspected," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury, holding it out for the elders to see. "A steel spearhead, not of our make, nor of the usual border ruffians. This is the mark of a hired soldier, a mercenary." Harland did not have the stomach for a fair fight. so he paid cowards to do his vile work in the dark. A council was called. Voices were raised in anger, demanding immediate retribution. A raid on Dust Hollow, but Elena, Wind Song, felt a different path. To answer darkness with more darkness will only prolong the night, she said, her voice a calm counterpoint to their rage. Harland believes his power lies in force and deceit. We must show him a different kind of power. She paused, her inner sight focusing. There is an ancient way, a ritual of the high winds. My flute. I believe I can call upon the currents, not for destruction, but for guidance. To weave a path through their blindness, we can draw them out, meet them on ground of our choosing, where the land itself is our ally. There was skepticism, but also hope in the eyes of the elders. They had seen the power of her spirit. Kai, his faith in her absolute, nodded his assent. Tell us, Wind's Song, how shall we proceed? Elena described her plan. She would play from a high, hidden point, her notes carried by the wind, creating sounds that would seem to emanate from multiple directions in the treacherous canyons leading away from Dust Hollow. Sounds that could disorient, confuse them, and ultimately lead Harlan's men into a prepared ambush, not for slaughter, but for capture. Days later, word was sent, through means Kai understood, that Harlan's men were again probing near Fire Mesa territory, emboldened by their perceived successful raid. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinthine canyons, following misleading tracks laid by Kai's scouts, Elena took her position. She closed her eyes, her fingers finding the familiar holes of her flute. She played, not just with her breath, but with her spirit, her notes weaving through the stone passages, amplified and distorted by the rock formations. She imagined the wind itself as her messenger, carrying confusion to their enemies, guiding her own people, the Fire Mesa warriors, moving like shadows. Close the trap. Harland and his remaining corps of hired guns found themselves surrounded, their escape routes cut off, the eerie, swirling notes of Elena's flute seemingly boxing them in. The fight, when it came, was brief and decisive. Kai, moving with the deadly grace of a desert panther, confronted Harland directly. The sheriff, enraged and cornered, fought recklessly, but he was no match for Kai's focused skill. A swift move, a disabling blow, and Harland was on his knees, his pistol skittering away. The mercenaries, seeing their leader defeated, surrendered. Kai stood over Harland, his expression grim. The desire for vengeance was a bitter taste in his mouth. But then he saw Elena approaching, guided by a young warrior, her face serene but resolute. He is beaten. Kai, she said softly. His power here is broken. He desecrated our sacred banner. He would have destroyed us. Kai said, his voice raw, and for that, he will make amends. Elena stated, but not with his death. His life is not ours to take. His punishment will be to undo the lies he has spread. She turned her unseeing eyes towards the defeated sheriff. Sheriff Harland, you will live, but you will ride to every settlement, every town, every lonely homestead where you or your men have spread your poison about me and the people of Fire Mesa. You will stand before them, and you will speak the truth. You will tell them of your deceit, of Kai's honor, of the welcome I received here. You will tell them that Elena, the blind woman you scorned, found sight among the savages you despise. Your voice will be the instrument of your atonement. Harland stared at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. To be publicly shamed, to be forced to recant his own words was a fate perhaps worse than death for a man of his arrogant pride. And if I refuse? He rasped. Kai's hand rested on the hilt of his knife. Then you will not leave these canyons alive. The choice was clear, as Harland and his subdued men were escorted away, destined for their humiliating pilgrimage of truth. Elena leaned against Kai. The wind sighed through the canyon, carrying the last notes of her song, the unspoken words of their shared journey, their trials, and their deepening bond filled the silence. They had faced the enemy, not just with strength of arms, but with wisdom, spirit, and a profound understanding of justice. Fire Mesa was safe, its honor restored, not through vengeance, but through the resounding power of truth, carried on the wind. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. The defeat of Sheriff Harland and his cronies had woven a new thread of respect for Elena. Wind song, into the fabric of Fire Mesa life. Yet, like a stubborn knot in an otherwise smooth weaving, a whisper of doubt persisted among a few traditionalist families. She was not of their blood. They murmured in the quiet of their dwellings. Her ways learned, not born. Her spirit was strong. Yes, her flute sang with a strange power, but could an outsider truly understand the deepest heart songs of the tribe? Could she stand as a true beacon if the oldest ways were challenged? Elena, sensitive to these unspoken currents, felt their unease like a subtle shift in the wind before a storm. She knew that trust, fully given, had to be earned in every fiber of her being. So, when the Council of Elders, prompted by these undercurrents, proposed she undergo the Dene Kehji, the Night of No Sound, an ancient ritual of deep listening and spiritual immersion, she agreed without hesitation. It was a path to either affirm her place or reveal her limits. Kai's hand tightened on hers when the ritual was announced, a silent question in his touch. She squeezed back, a reassurance she hoped he'd understand. This I must do. The Night of No Sound was not about deprivation, but about opening. She was taken to a small, secluded box canyon, a place whispered to be a conduit for the Earth's oldest voices. Alone, with only a skin of water and a thin blanket against the desert chill, she was to remain from dusk till dawn, in absolute silence, seeking not to speak, but to hear what the world said when human voices were stilled, as darkness enveloped her, the familiar symphony of the night desert, the chirp of crickets, the distant yip of a coyote, the rustle of unseen creatures, seemed to magnify, but Elena pushed past these surface sounds. She laid her hands upon the cold, ancient stone of the canyon walls, and it began to speak to her not in words, but in ages of compressed time, in the slow, geological breathing of the earth. She felt the memory of suns that had risen and set for millennia, the passage of water that had carved these very stones, the faint, stubborn pulse of life deep within the rock. The wind, when it sighed through the narrow passage, was no longer just moving air. It carried whispers of distant mountains, the scent of unseen herbs, the ephemeral touch of spirits passing. Each gust, each eddy, was a phrase, a story, and the ground beneath her, when she pressed her ear to it, transmitted the faintest tremors, the silent, padded footsteps of night hunters, the settling of the vast land itself. A language of movement, of presence, of life asserting itself in the quiet dark. It was a profound immersion, a dissolution of self into the greater whole, and an awakening of an inner power that transcended all her known senses. She was not just blind, she was seeing, hearing, feeling the world with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, yet deeply centering. When Kai and the elders came for her at dawn, they found her not exhausted, but radiant, a serene stillness about her that spoke of a deep communion. The unspoken doubts in the eyes of some of the elders seemed to soften, replaced by a dawning awe. Elena had not just endured, she had clearly touched something sacred. Yet, life at Fire Mesa continued to present its own challenges, even for its revered wind song. Shortly after Elena's vigil, the time came for the tribe to choose a new war protector, a leader responsible for the physical security and strategic defense of their people. Kai, with his proven courage and his unwavering defense of their ways, was a natural candidate. Elena felt a quiet pride, a certainty that his strength would be recognized. However, the council, in its wisdom, chose another, a younger warrior named Tahne, known for his intricate knowledge of the surrounding territories and his ability to forge alliances with smaller, scattered bands. Kai accepted their decision with his usual stoicism, his face unreadable, but Elena sensed the flicker of disappointment, the brief shadow in his eyes before his composure returned. That night, she simply sat beside him by their fire, her presence a silent acknowledgement of his worth, her hand resting on his, conveying what words could not. He leaned into her touch, a small, almost imperceptible sigh escaping him. Their bond, forged in adversity, needed no grand pronouncements. The council's choice of Tahne, while respected, inadvertently highlighted simmering disagreements within the tribe. Some felt the old ways of isolation were best, while others, like Tahne, advocated for more outward engagement. These subtle rifts threatened the unity that was Fire Mesa's greatest strength. It was Elena, drawing upon the deep listening she had cultivated during the Night of No Sound, who proposed a way forward. Our memories bind us, she told the council, but sometimes we remember different parts of the same story, or the pain of old wounds overshadows the lessons learned. Let us gather, not in debate, but in shared remembrance. She orchestrated a Ngaithuk, a ritual of storytelling unlike any they had known. In the great kiva, the sacred underground chamber, she sat with her flute. She did not speak of current disputes, but played melodies that evoked the tribe's oldest sagas, the great migrations, the times of famine and of plenty, the heroes and the tricksters, the betrayals and the reconciliations. Her voice, when it joined the flute, was not a narrative, but a current of pure emotion, weaving through the music, inviting others to add their own threads. Elders began to speak, sharing tales their grandfathers had told. Warriors recounted acts of bravery or moments of fear. Women spoke of loss and resilience. Slowly, painstakingly, a collective tapestry of memory was rewoven, reminding them of their shared journey, their common blood, their indivisible destiny. The factions, listening to the echoes of their shared past, found their differences diminishing in the face of their enduring identity. This newfound unity was soon to be tested. Scouts reported the approach of a large band, the Dzilga, the Wandering Mountain People, a tribe with whom the Fire Mesa had a bitter, blood-soaked history stretching back generations. They were not raiding, but moving with a grim purpose, their numbers formidable. They made camp a half-day's ride from Fire Mesa and sent a messenger. They demanded a parley, and they specifically demanded that the outsider woman, the one called Wind's Song, be present. Their intent, the messenger conveyed with thinly veiled threat, was to judge her influence, to determine if she was a source of a new, unsettling power in their traditional enemies. Fear rippled through Fire Mesa. Many urged Kai and Tatnai to prepare for war. The Dzilga were known for their ferocity and their long memories. To hand Elena over, even for a parley under such terms, felt like a betrayal. Kai's hand rarely left the hilt of his knife, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They will not touch her, he vowed, his voice a low growl. But Elena, calm amidst the rising tension, saw a different possibility. They come in fear, perhaps as much as aggression, she said to the anxious council. Fear of the unknown, fear of what they do not understand. Let me speak with them. My voice is for peace, not for war. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a sun-bleached plain between the two territories. Elena stood before the stern-faced Dzilga elders and their formidable war chief. Kai and Tahnai a few paces behind her, their warriors watching, poised and ready. The Dzilga war chief, a man named Kida, scarred and imposing, spoke first, his voice like grinding stones. We hear tales of this Wind's Song, an outsider who weaves spells with her music, who has turned the Fire Mesa from their ancient paths. We come to see if this woman is a harbinger of ill fortune, a sorceress who must be silenced. Instead of fear, Elena felt a profound sadness for the generations of hatred that had poisoned the ground between their peoples. She stepped forward, her hands open, her flute held loosely. I am Elena, she said, her voice clear and carrying, imbued with the quiet authority of the Night of No Sound. I weave no spells, but those of shared breath and common ground. I came to the Fire Mesa as a stranger, much as you might see me now. They gave me shelter, and I offered them the only gifts I possess, the songs of my heart, the stories I have learned from the wind and the stone. She spoke of her own blindness, not as a weakness, but as a path to a different kind of seeing. She spoke of Dust Hollow's cruelty and Fire Mesa's unexpected acceptance. She did not deny their old enmity, but reframed it. For too long, our tribes have listened only to the echoes of old battles, the whispers of remembered pain. We have defined ourselves by who we are against, rather than who we can be together. Then, she raised her flute. She did not play a song of Fire Mesa, nor did she try to mimic any known Dzilga melody. Instead, she played a simple, haunting air that spoke of the vastness of the desert, the shared sky above them, the fragility of life, the universal longing for peace and a place to call home. It was a song of such raw, unadorned sincerity that it seemed to bypass the walls of suspicion and bitterness. When she finished, a deep silence fell. Kida, the war chief, looked at her for a long moment, his harsh features unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. Your song, it speaks a truth our old hatreds have long forgotten, he admitted, his voice rougher now, less aggressive. Perhaps the winds of change are blowing, and this wind song carries a new message for both our peoples. It was not an immediate friendship, but it was a beginning. The demand for a judgment was dropped. Cautious talks began, facilitated by Elena's patient diplomacy and Kai's steady, watchful presence. She helped them find common ground, shared anxieties about the encroaching settlements of the Bluecoats, the dwindling herds, the need for safe passage. Through her, through the sincere honesty of her voice and the profound wisdom she now embodied, an ancient feud began to thaw. An alliance, tentative but hopeful, was forged, not on the strength of warriors, but on the resonance of a blind woman's song and the courage to choose a new path. Elena, once an outcast, had not only found her own identity and belonging, but was now instrumental in reshaping the destiny of two tribes, proving that true leadership arose from the deepest wellsprings of the spirit. The seasons at Fire Mesa turned with the slow, deliberate grace of an ancient dance, each one etching deeper lines of wisdom onto the faces of the elders and a resilient joy into the hearts of the children. Elena, now truly Wind's song, or, as she had come to think of it, Song of the Wind, a name she felt she had earned and defined for herself, moved through the life of the tribe not merely as an honored member, but as its spiritual current, her presence a source of calm guidance and profound insight. The bond between her and Kai had deepened into a partnership that needed few words. They were two streams that had merged, flowing together with a shared strength and purpose. 10 winters had frosted the high peaks and thawed into the vibrant greens of spring since Elena had first arrived. The time had come for the Ke Alkida, the ritual of 10 summers, passing a sacred gathering where each member of the Fire Mesa people, and now their allies among the Dzilga, would speak of the lessons the wind, the earth, and the spirits had taught them over the preceding decade. It was a time of reflection, of gratitude, and of reaffirming the bonds that held them together. The clearing where they gathered was alive with the scent of piñon smoke and ceremonial herbs. When it was Elena's turn to speak, a hush fell over the assembly. She stood, her face serene, her hands resting lightly on the flute that was now an extension of her voice. 10 summers ago, she began, her voice clear and resonant, carrying over the silent crowd. I came to you from a place of bitter echoes, a place where my name was synonymous with pity and scorn. Here, you gave me a new name, Wind's Song, but today I wish to claim it fully, to tell you what it means to me. She paused, the silence so profound one could hear the distant cry of a hawk. I name myself Song of the Wind, not for a gentle breeze, but for the gale that roars through the canyons, the voice that cannot be suppressed. I am Song of the Wind because what they tried to silence in Dust Hollow, what they sought to bury under their contempt, echoed louder than all their hatred. It found its strength here, among you, in the heart of this land that taught me to truly see. A murmur of deep assent rippled through the crowd. Her words were not just a speech. They were an affirmation of her spirit, her journey, and the collective strength they had found together. But even as they celebrated this milestone of peace and unity, the shadow of past enmities was not entirely banished. Sheriff Harland, his heart a shriveled knot of resentment, had not forgotten his humiliations. Word reached Fire Mesa, carried by anxious scouts from the allied Dzilga. Harland, consumed by a desperate, final malice, had been seen far south, hiring a band of ruthless outcasts, men who would burn their own mothers for a bottle of whiskey. Their target, it was whispered, was no longer just a sacred banner, but the vast ancestral forest that bordered Fire Mesa's western hunting grounds, a lifeline for both tribes. To destroy it was to strike at their very survival. Kite, now a seasoned war leader working in concert with Tahnai and the Dzilga war chief Kiida, acted swiftly. The newly forged alliance, tested by Elena's wisdom, now faced its first true trial by fire. Or, they hoped, By its prevention, warriors from both tribes rode out, not for vengeance, but for protection. They found Harlan's arsonists as they were preparing their devilry, laying trails of pitch and oil at the edge of the ancient woods. The battle was fierce but brief. The combined strength of the tribes, fighting for their homes and their future, overwhelmed the mercenaries. Harlan himself, his face a mask of twisted fury, was captured by Kai in the smoky chaos, brought before Elena and the tribal councils once more. Harlan was a broken man. His last desperate gamble failed. He expected death. "You have sought to burn our world, Harlan," Kai stated, his voice cold as winter stone. "There is no forgiveness for such an act." But Elena stepped forward, her presence commanding a somber silence. "Twice now, you have stood before us as a defeated man," she said, her voice holding no anger, only a profound weariness. "Twice, you have brought your darkness to our doorstep. Death would be an easy escape for the harm you have caused, the fear you have sown. But your life, even one as misspent as yours, holds one last lesson." She paused, and all leaned in to hear her judgment. "You will not die by our hands, but you will be banished, not just from Fire Mesa, not just from Dust Hollow, but from the desert itself. From this day forward, should you be found anywhere between the Sleeping Mountains and the Serpent River, your life is forfeit to any man, woman, or child who finds you. You will wander where there are no memories of your bitterness, no communities to poison with your hate. Go, and may you find, in your utter desolation, a sliver of the understanding you denied others." Harlan, stripped of his weapons, his horse, and his last shred of dignity, was escorted to the farthest edge of their allied territories and sent stumbling into the barren lands, a ghost banished from the memory of the living desert. That year, the first snows came unusually early, a thick white blanket descending upon the mesas and canyons, bringing with it a hushed beauty, but also the threat of a hard winter. It was seen as a powerful omen. The elders declared it was time for the Yas Niltuiz, the first snow ceremony, a ritual of cleansing, gratitude, and preparing the spirit of the land for its long sleep. And it was Elena, Song of the Wind, who was unanimously chosen to light the first ceremonial fire. In the heart of the great Kiva, surrounded by the leaders and people of both tribes, she knelt. The tinder was dry, the wood laid with care. Kai handed her the fire starter, his hand covering hers for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared, the peace they had fought for, as the first spark caught, as the tiny flame wavered and then grew. Casting its warm glow on the gathered faces, a collective sigh of hope and reverence filled the sacred space. The fire was a symbol of unity, of resilience, of the enduring human spirit that could find warmth even in the deepest winter, a promise of rebirth. A few weeks later, as the snow lay deep and silent upon the land, a small party from a distant, struggling settlement known as Black Hollow arrived at Fire Mesa. They had heard tales of Wind Song, of her wisdom and compassion. With them, they brought a child, a girl of perhaps 7 winters, her eyes sightless, her small frame trembling with cold and fear. She had been orphaned, they explained, and her own people, mired in hardship and superstition, knew not what to do with a blind child. Elena knelt before the little girl, her hands gently finding the child's cold, trembling ones. She felt the echo of her own past, the sting of being an outcast, the loneliness of a world perceived differently. "What is your name, little one?" Elena asked softly. The child shook her head. unable to speak through her shivers. "She has no given name," one of the Black Hollow men said gruffly. "Just the blind one." Elena's heart ached. She drew the child closer, wrapping her own warm cloak around the small shoulders. "Then we shall find you one," she said, her voice a promise. She looked up at Kai, who stood watching, his eyes filled with a deep tenderness. "Here," Elena declared, her voice resonating with quiet conviction. "You will have what I did not. You will have a name. You will have a fire. You will have a home." She decided then, with Kai's unspoken assent, that this child would be theirs. As the winter stars glittered with an icy brilliance in the vast desert sky, Elena found herself standing with Kai on the very same precipice in the secluded Box Canyon where she had undergone the Night of No Sound so many years before. The world below was a hushed landscape of white under the moon. She raised her flute to her lips. This time, she played not a complex melody, nor a song of sorrow or striving, but a single, clear, sustained note. It soared out into the crystalline air, echoing off the silent stones, carrying across the sleeping mesas. It was a note of pure being, a signal that the circle was complete, that the wind, having carried her voice, her story, her spirit across the land, was now beginning its journey anew, carrying new songs, new hopes. Kai's arm was around her, his presence a steadfast warmth against the cold. He said nothing. Nothing needed to be said. And so, the story of Elena, the blind woman from Dust Hollow, wove itself into the greater legend of the West. They did not speak of her as the jilted bride, the object of pity. Instead, whispers traveled on the wind, from lonely campfires to bustling new settlements, from the high mountains to the sprawling plains. They spoke of Song of the Wind, the woman whose spirit was so strong, whose voice so true, that she had learned the language of the earth itself. They said she was the one who had faced down hatred with courage, united enemies with wisdom, and taught a whole people how to listen. They said she was the one who made even the wind remember her name. Wikisgor. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or just that quiet ache behind the ribs, then don't let it pass silent. Drop your thoughts down below. What part stuck with you? What did you feel when the blind girl faced a world that tried to forget her? And if you believe in stories that carry dust and thunder, in voices too strong to be silenced, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'll be right here, telling more stories like this one